we have about a month and a half worth of work left to do. We, as you know, passed a $93.6 billion budget at the before the end of June, and I think there's a lot of optimism, not just in Sacramento, but around the state of California, about where California is headed. In my own background, before I headed up to Sacramento in December, was as the mayor of Santa Monica, and I was on the Santa Monica City Council for 13 years. Before that, in Santa Monica, I was the president of one of our local neighborhood organizations. So I very much value the work that you do as neighborhood organizations, bringing the issues as you see them on the street to your elected leaders so that you can improve your communities and your city. That's something that should take place not just from the community council level to the city, but it also should be from the community councils to the state of California. So I want to invite you to be in touch with me about your issues. I think there is no place more important in the state of California than the city of Los Angeles. We are at a transition. We just elected a new mayor. We have in Los Angeles, when I say we, I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up Olympic, very close to Olympic in La Cienega. Went to Fairfax High. Went to John Burroughs for a year. So Los Angeles is very near and dear to my heart. And as I was saying, I think the city of Los Angeles is one of the great cities of the world, and is poised to really make a significant comeback. I think Mayor Garcetti is a visionary, but I think he needs to rely on you to help him craft the vision for the future of Los Angeles. And one of the things I'm most interested in, and I'm well positioned to provide assistance, is on transportation issues. The Speaker of the Assembly appointed me to be the chair of Budget Subcommittee 3, which oversees both natural resources, very important area, but also transportation. And one of the places where I think in the state of California we've kind of lost sight of is on creating a network of local transit options, including knitting together pedestrian, bicycle, automobile, and public transit and new public transit options. So two things that I'm particularly interested in are bike share programs. You're probably aware that Mayor Villaraigosa's bike share proposal didn't work out. And that's something that I'm interested in working on, have been working on for the last couple of years in Santa Monica. So I hope to hear from you and be discussing with you bike share programs in the future. But probably the more critically important thing that I think is missing, particularly on the west side of Los Angeles, where we have some of the worst traffic in the United States, if not California, is that we've done a pretty good job in Los Angeles of planning and now building out our public transit on a regional level, but we really have not been focusing on what we can do better at the sub-regional level. So looking at model cities, at least cities that I consider model cities, like Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, where they really have their transit act together. They are using trolleys and trams and other modes of transit to move people around very, very effectively. They can be funded on the local level. They don't have to be funded by some of the traditional funding mechanisms that MTA uses. And I'm very interested in exploring how we can build connections that can unplug some of the bottlenecks that we have, particularly those that I'm familiar with on the west side and here in Hollywood, between West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, in the Pico Robertson area, out in Santa Monica and West LA. So for those of you who are interested in transit issues, and I know that most neighborhood councils and neighborhood organizations, there is an interest in trying to resolve traffic issues. That's something that I'd really like to create a better dialogue and discussion on. There are a myriad of other issues that need to be addressed in Los Angeles and in Southern California. And one of the things that has held us back is the fact that we're 88 cities. One really, really big city, Los Angeles, and then city of Long Beach, which is relatively large, and 86 other relatively small cities that spend, if you think about it, very little time talking to one another and thinking about regional strategies. We have SCAG that works on regional issues, but that is an even larger organization than just the Los Angeles organization, so Los Angeles City. So I think it's extremely important that we start visioning the future of our cities and our region, and you are the folks who can help make that happen. I look forward to having a dialogue with you. The best way that you can keep up that dialogue is to keep communicating with me. Stephanie, where are you? Oh, there comes. Stephanie Cohen is from my office. She will be coming to your meetings more frequently than I, because I have to be up in Sacramento 8 months of the year and Monday through Thursday. But she's charged with coming to your neighborhood council meetings, has been attending them, and you'll be seeing her frequently out in the district. I encourage you to keep up a dialogue with her, keep in touch with my office, send letters to me, send emails to me. We want to be as accessible as possible to you.
Which email address should they use?
Stephanie, what's the best email address to use?
You should contact me, definitely. If you want to send something directly to the Assembly member, the best way to do that is on our website at www.asmdc.org/Bloom, and that's BLOOM. And there's a contact me button, and that goes directly to him.
So I'd be happy to, I don't know how much time you want to leave me, but I'd be happy to answer questions.
Might as well start. Is this how we'll create a partnership? Is a dialogue?
Joanne Clark and I live in West Hills Neighborhood Council. I know when my husband worked for this one company, when their office was in Hollywood, he could take the orange line and the red line right down to Hollywood and Vine and walk to work. Then their company moved to Playa Vista, and then there was all hell breaking loose. There was no public transportation. If you wanted to try and get to Playa Vista, it was going to take him 3 hours to go one way. And now, as I understand from our bank meetings, Valley Alliance Neighborhood Council, the MTD wants to shut down the buses that go from the Valley over to UCLA. They want to cut the service on those things. Those are 2 lines that are critical to getting from the Valley into the city. And I really think that you should be looking into this situation because, who can carpool when there's no, or who can use public transportation when you can't find it?
I'll make a point to it. Thank you. Yes.
Tony Wilkinson. I'm from Panorama City, but my son is your constituent in Ventura Hill. And I would really hope that transportation too, that you work with Rena Zarian, your colleague, who's my assemblyman.
He sits right behind me on the assembly floor.
Awesome.
Great guy.
There's a big solution, this East San Fernando Valley Transit Corridor. The ultimate result of that, if it were, let's say, a tunnel between the Valley and Beverly and UCLA, that's the big idea, that the Valley would never secede again in the city, but also if you talk about congestion on the west side, all those people in that transit would be able to live in the San Fernando Valley and back and forth. But in the short term, she's absolutely right. That bus from the Valley to UCLA is standing room only. It is absolutely unconscionable that there's only one. I didn't know there was 2.
There's a secondary type.
Right, and you know, that's the kind of thing where I don't think that we pressured MTA enough to solve like your West Side problems.
Thank you. Let's go all the way to the back.
Yes, I'm Paul Hatfield, neighbor of Castle Valley Village. I understand a bill passed just the other day creating what would be a retirement fund for private sector employees that would require people to contribute 3% of their gross pay into this fund, and it would be managed by the state. I realize there's an opt-out to that, but to the extent people participate in that, I see the potential for that creating even a higher unfunded liability than we have today. How did you vote on that? How do you feel about it?
I believe that's a Senate bill that hasn't come to the Assembly.
Oh, okay.
And
Well, how do you feel?
so I'm not sufficiently familiar with it to weigh in on it. Do you happen to know the bill number?
No, I don't.
If it was just voted on a few days ago, that was when the Senate was in session, the Assembly was already on break. But I'd be happy to look into it. I'm not interested in creating additional unfunded liabilities. We have a very, very significant problem, similar one here in Los Angeles, but a very significant problem in the state of California that needs to be addressed. The governor has begun to address it, I think, quite responsibly. We have more work to do on that.
And you can follow up with me on bill issues, and I can get back to any of you that want to know about specific bills. I left some of my cards over here.
Well, we have that, and then you, so.
We have a financial problem in Los Angeles, and apparently it's outside Los Angeles. We have a major money package on the wall behind me called Hollywood. And you're trying to figure out what to do with it. We need to bring it home. And we can collect all the money that they spend on the sites, and we'll increase all the unregulated businesses. This would be a great way to get rid of our deficit. And I know you're not with the city, but you could talk about it. This is a wonderful way to bring money back into our city.
By economic development in Hollywood,
Well,
I should be looking on the walls.
having the motion to put the studios shoot in Los Angeles rather than anywhere else.
Oh, yes. Well,
We need to do that.
runaway production continues to be a big issue. It is a Sacramento issue because we do provide tax incentives to keep that production here. There is discussion underway about how to increase the tax incentives. It does cost the state some money, so it's a budgetary issue and of some concern. But I agree with you completely that we need to use as many tools as we can to keep production here. I very strongly believe that that form of economic development and not losing one of our core industries is important. Another one that's not so much a factor here on the west side, but is in Los Angeles and in our region, is the aerospace industry that we need to keep here.
And my friend, our new mayor also was looking into this issue, so work with him.
Will do. Yes, sir.
My name is Dave Ebersachs. I was the Winnetka Neighborhood Council, but I was a 42-year resident of Agoura before we became Aurora Hills. And I got involved in the neighborhood council system because I was involved back when Frank Hadley was in her first term and that sort of thing. So it's really important. But some of these transportation issues, I think, are kind of have an interplay with some of our planning issues as well. I remember taking 5 buses to get to Brentwood from Aurora Hills. It was a real pain. But one of the things I want to talk about, when you talk about SCAG, there's something that's affecting us, and that's the Compass 2% proposal that SCAG is pushing forward, whereby all the SCAG areas are saying, we're going to emphasize that all the development, all the growth that we're allowing for population growth be assigned to this 2% area where there's transit districts and that sort of thing. Some of the presuppositions on that are that there's going to be things like maglev trains and all that sort of thing. What that's doing is further exacerbating the problem we have with things like 1818, where these density bonuses are provided for areas around transit-oriented districts or transit areas, whether the transit is actually there or not. What that's doing, and you see it in the Millennium Project down the street, it's choking the neighborhoods. It's spilling out because that density, what might be density on Hollywood Boulevard because it's a transit district, means that the person on the single-family residence up the streets then have something to point to and say, well, that building next to you is taller, so we're going to get a height bonus. And it's a density creep. And there's one thing that you can do with us, is that tie this kind of density bonuses to actual improvements in the transportation system, not promised ones. There are things like SCAG, which I'll bet half the people in this room are not familiar with it. And certainly, I'd say 98% of Los Angelinos are not familiar with it. But they're making the decisions that are affecting our neighborhoods with these density bonuses and these presuppositions. And we're asking you to nip that in the bud.
Well, one of the things that you're identifying has been a problem in the region for a long time, and that is that our transit planning has lagged behind our growth, and we really have to get ahead of that. So.
Well, what we experienced, and the reason why there's a city of Calabasas and Sears and Agoura Hills is because the county was making decisions and allowing development so that they could build roads, which is backwards. So we're hoping that you can preserve the open space even if it's in the city.
We've got a lot of hands up, so let me take a couple on this side, and then I haven't come over to this side, so we're going to shift over here. You, sir, and Richard.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for coming out here. My name is Abel John. I'm from Mid-City West, where Fairfax High School is, Lackland is, the Beverly Center, the road. We're actually in the middle of hearing all the things that you're excited about on the transportation issues is really refreshing. We're actually, I'm sure people have read that there's been talk about trolleys and whatnot in the area, and we actually haven't had talk trolley committee to try to create a system, or at least
that's great to
a dash type of system that's kind of in character with the area. And I was just wondering, in terms of the types of local transportation solutions, have you seen public-private partnerships that work out where you could get trolleys into areas like ours?
Yeah, the typical way of financing these projects outside of tax increment funding is to capture value from increasing real estate prices along the routes of transit projects. So the theory is that if you bring transit and a transit stop in front of a particular piece of property, the value of that property goes up. And so you try to capture the value by creating assessment districts that assess properties along the route, commercial properties, and that finances the project. Operational costs are typically dealt through by user fees and other methodologies. That's the method that I'm familiar with. I'm not an expert on the topic, but I understand that there may be others as well. But there are ways of getting these projects done. We wouldn't be the first city in the country to be doing it. The models are out there. We need to coalesce around a plan to implement and find the right economic models. I'm quite sure they can happen.
Would you be willing to say, for example, send us a letter of support, for example, to help us in building these types of solutions?
Well, let me learn more about what your proposal is, and we would certainly consider that. Right now, just for your information, we're at the early stages in my office of planning a West Side meeting of elected officials to talk about a variety of transportation issues. What I want to try and do, we have a council of governments that has met periodically about transportation issues. I want to get that group of people together again, focus on transportation, focus on intersections that are gridlocked and things that we can do in the short term to try and unplug intersections. One thing that doesn't happen is that, for example, you've got Santa Monica and Los Angeles sitting right next to one another. The two cities do not communicate about transportation issues.
Yes, they do. They swear at each other.
Well, the residents certainly do. And it's ridiculous if you think about it, because a lot of folks in Los Angeles like to point the finger and say it's all that development in Santa Monica that's causing all of our problems, and people in Santa Monica swear at everybody because they can't get out of their own city, and we don't spend any time speaking about what the solutions are, how we can work on fixing some of the problems. We spend a heck of a lot of time saying, well, we shouldn't create more development, we shouldn't build that building, and those are legitimate things to be talking about, but the reality is we have a problem now that should be discussed more, that there are some solutions for, and I don't think they're being sufficiently talked about and addressed. Gentleman in the green shirt, then I promised to come over to the side of the room.
Okay, just to give you some numbers about transporting this thing. The man who's wearing the black Seattle Washington Road Company, I'm just going to jump on what he's saying. I'm part of Hollywood Northwest Neighborhood Council. I live in the Yucca Village, which is the dense border which they're trying to make dense. 90028, that zip code. I did a zip code scan of the census from 2000 to 2010. And that zip code and all the zip codes around. So from Franklin to Fountain down here, and from Western to La Brea, we've had 3 red line stops. And in 10 years, the vacancies have gone up to 1,000% over what they were in 2000. Homeowners, 225% for a real vacancy rate. Now, when that is scanned out for the building that's been done, we're still at a 75% vacancy rate. What's happening is because all the luxury buildings are being built, is that you have people moving in together and being roommates because they can't afford, the 29-year-olds who come to music institutes, that they can't afford to pay these luxury building rates. Now, because we had 13 years now of the red line, even though we don't have numbers on the last 3, but we've had 13 years to try transit-oriented density, and people are voting on their feet because in the entire zip codes around, except for the hills, which have showed 2% growth, the entire people are voting on their feet to leave the area because it's not working for them.
You're saying there's 75% commercial vacancies or residential?
Rental vacancies. People living. The whole thing about transit-oriented density is it's supposed to attract people to live in the area and walk. Appleyard, 1950, said that the more cars you have going through a community, the less it's going to be a community, the less people have to walk around. We've got 3 major secondary freeways. Vine, La Brea, Highland. They're secondary. They're all going into the Cahuenga Pass. If this is entirely dense, it's like putting a cork in an hourglass. People can't move through. If there's an emergency, if there's a terrorism, it stops. We had a shooting at Hollywood and Vine a year ago. It stopped traffic entirely. People couldn't move through. It's a 45-minute ride now on a Friday night, all the way through to Cedar-Sinai, if you have to get there. Ambulances can't get into the hills, they can't get here. And if the city wanted to do this,
forgive me for interrupting, is Cedars the primary emergency room for that area?
No.
it depends on where the ambulance is called.
Depends if they have insurance or not.
But what I'm saying is, if the city wanted a better way to shove us into thinking about transit-oriented density, it would be to block everybody. That's right. Hollywood is the center of LA. Glendale to the west side. You've got to go through Hollywood.
Add to this, we're together on Hollywood Hills Neighborhood West Neighborhood Traffic Chair. We're living in an insane asylum of planning of the city council. There's nothing that can stop the mesmerized look on their face. About 1.2 square million feet on Vine. They've ignored a letter from Caltrans saying, well, you can't build something that big 200 yards from the Hollywood freeway. They've just chosen to look the other way. The thing that Garcetti is involved with the planning in Hollywood is insane. He can't get this thing up quick enough. I watched my city council laugh off an active earthquake fault in the last meeting. There's proof that there's an active earthquake fault when they want to build, and Councilman O'Farrell had the nerve to tell intelligent people, well, we got a lot of earthquakes in Los Angeles. It's not that. He's like Jackie Bateson. It's not that active. It's a little bit active. Don't worry about it. He lives in Florida on Saturday. There you go. This is is what we have to put up with.
If I'm not mistaken, the state geologist has,
I have to tell you, we've run out of intelligent people here in Los Angeles City Council. We're looking for the state to step in, a man like yourself, with some integrity, who say, you know what, something's very wrong here. We don't need 1.2 million square foot. How about this? Millennium Partners doesn't make $1 billion. They just
weighing in on the
maybe they
Millennium
just make
Project.
half. And we're hoping that you're in contact with Caltrans to take a very serious look at this, because the city council, there's no talking to them at all. I've taken 10 days off from work to go down to city council meetings. It's ridiculous. They don't listen to anything we have to say. 40 neighborhood groups, they don't listen. I'm hoping you're listening to us.
Thank you. I'm not sure who had their hand up first here, so, all right.
Earlier, in your earlier comments, you talked about the importance of visioning, community should vision. So I want to ask you, can you give us some words of wisdom on what you, some examples of that? And I'll give you a couple of thoughts here to help you out. We have, like what's...
You don't really need it.
But anyway, like what you've heard a little bit over here, we're in Assymblymember. I'm in Assymblymember. We're at the foot of the mountain. And we only have really basically 2 ways into the community. We're landlocked. Okay, so if we have something come our way that is highly dense because it's financially feasible for them and packs everybody in, but we don't have what maybe parts of the rest of the city have with all these different ways in and ways out and services and neighborhood services to provide for them. Here we are communicating, visioning to these folks, it's just not possible, it's not feasible, it's not doable. But this is what we'd really like to see, that we know will work, that is pedestrian friendly, a lot of the different buzzwords that the community wants. From when you spoke earlier about, vision your community, how can you help to guide us? Because what we found when we go out to these different meetings where we meet with the developer, they see different statistics, they see different points of of how to bring in those, whether it's retailers or whatever it is, that are different than what we live and breathe in our communities and we're on the ground seeing. So I don't know, it's a lot, but I hope that I tried to get my point across in guidance for us.
I think one thing is that we all have to be listening to one another, and it's true that a developer typically comes to a community sometimes from within the community and proposes an idea that they see as the proper vision. But in a good process, the community is brought into the process, and the community's vision is integrated into that proposal. And so it becomes an amalgam of the community's vision, the developer's vision, the city's planning vision, all wrapped into one. In a perfect world, all of that comes together in a proposal that may not please everybody, but becomes a unifying vision that is both economically sustainable, helps with the economic development of the community, provides benefits to the community, and provides new commercial and residential options for the community. That's very, very much a local process. That's not something that we do at the state level, something we can encourage at the state level, and I think have prior to my being in the legislature. But I think that's kind of the way that local visioning should work in a perfect world, and I think in a lot of places it does work that way.
Okay, one last question. So,
Well, then you pick.
Lydia,
Yeah, if I'm the last, because I think I can close together a lot of what people said. And that is, I think what you're hearing, I think the real message that we're trying to send you is the fact that We've been dealing with the city for a long time, and you know that there are city issues, and we understand you're in Sacramento. But what I think the problem is, and I'll reference David's conversation earlier about SB 1818, the state level SB 18 implementation regulations have to do with what the state recommends for the cities. But the city puts in its own ordinance on how they're going to implement. The two between the city of Los Angeles and Sacramento don't match. The city is much more lenient to the developers, and it's affecting the communities. I think what we're asking, I think what I'm hearing today is that the neighborhood councils want to understand that if they give you the information to help guide, will you support us as we move forward with the city to try to get some of these changes implemented? I really think that's what I'm hearing, is they want to know is, will you help support us if we can bring you what is happening and put it together, what we'd like to see? Would you support us with the city council in helping to get some of these things changed?
Well, I think the best answer I can give you on that is that we should continue having that discussion. I can't answer you here today, but I want to continue the dialogue and see where we can agree. And if we can, and if I'm in agreement, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, let's take one more, and then we got to move on.
Thank you for coming out here. Here's how you can help neighborhood councils be effective. Okay, I stood at the beach end in the front line with your staff to beat down Caston and Assembly.
I'm sorry, to
Caston and I did it because he had to come to me to make the deal. AB 1229 would have taken away all my negotiating ability.